In 1692, the entire global population was subjected to what is basically the largest, most invasive, and honestly most successful psychological manipulation in the entire history of human civilization.
Yeah, it really is unparalleled. I mean, we're talking about a scale that is just hard to comprehend.
Right. Entire cities were just erased from physical map. Centuries of historical records spanning, I don't know how many dozens of languages and cultures were systematically falsified.
Completely rewritten.
Exactly. Millions of individual human minds were invaded, altered, and just rewritten to support a totally fabricated version of reality. And the perpetrators of this global gaslighting, they didn't use arms.
No.
They didn't use technology. They didn't fire a single shot. They used memory charms.
It remains the most audacious logistical and sociological undertaking we have on record. Seriously.
It really is.
We are talking about the deliberate blinding of humanity to a fundamental law of nature, a campaign so absolute that, centuries later, the descendants of those whose minds were wiped actually defend the fabricated reality with
Crazy. Well, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are taking a massive, incredibly detailed, honestly, deeply unsettling journey into the architecture of a world we all think we understand. We have this extensive historical lore transcript in front of us, and our mission today for you listening is to basically tear down the superficial narrative.
Right. Because the surface story it doesn't hold up.
Not at all. We are going to explore the profound, gradual, and terrifyingly complex sociological shift that forced the magical world into permanent institutionalized hiding.
Because the standard narrative you always hear treats the separation of the magical and non-magical worlds as this simple mutual peace treaty. A handshake in a dark room.
Like everyone just agreed to walk away.
Yeah, exactly. But what this source material reveals is a deeply complex study in the mechanics of terror, the extreme fragility of human trust, and the absolute logistical nightmare of hiding an entire parallel society in plain sight.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to actually understand why the walls went up, we have to travel back to a time before the sequel, a time when there were no borders at all.
The era of quiet coexistence.
Right. Let's paint the picture for everyone listening.
Yay.
If we could, project the backdrop from our research here into the room, you'd see this warm, rustic, 14th century village scene.
Yeah, thatched roofs, muddy cart paths, the whole thing.
Exactly. It looks perfectly normal. You got a blacksmith's forge, some chickens.
Yeah.
But if you look closely at the edges, the forest line blurs into something slightly overgrown, something that just kind of hums with a quiet, unspoken energy.
And that visual is so important. It represents a time long before the concept of an international statute of secrecy. I mean, magical and non-magical people shared the exact same physical spaces.
They were just neighbors.
Literally neighbors. Witches and wizards didn't live in these heavily warded, unplottable valleys or hidden alleys in London. They lived at the end of the lane.
Wow.
Their daily routines, their commerce, their survival, it all overlapped entirely with ordinary people.
And the source material details this really fascinating dynamic. It wasn't that Muggles were, completely blind to the magic happening around them. They noticed.
Oh, they definitely noticed.
Right. Like you have a local healer you seek out when your kid has a fever that just won't break, and maybe her poultices work a little too fast.
Or you have a neighbor whose wheat fields mysteriously survive a devastating frost, while the rest of the county's crops just die on the stalk.
Yeah, exactly. The non-magical neighbors noticed those anomalies. A door that unlocked without a key, a fire that burned blue on a Tuesday.
But the key here is that they absorbed those anomalies through a lens of pragmatic tolerance. It wasn't ideological panic yet.
Right.
Though we do have to be very careful not to romanticize this era as some utopian, harmonious integration of two peoples.
It wasn't kumbaya.
Not at all. This was a highly fragile balance, and it was maintained almost entirely through habit. It was not built on a foundation of structural understanding, and it certainly wasn't built on formal legal agreements.
I want to push on that a bit.
Yeah.
Because if I'm a medieval farmer, right. And I know for a fact the woman at the edge of the woods can literally manipulate reality, why am I just cool with it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why does mere habit keep me from either, worshiping her as a god or driving her out of sheer envy and terror?
Well, it comes down to basic survival because your immediate material needs outweigh your existential curiosity.
Huh.
Think about it. The farmer doesn't care about the metaphysical implications of a reality-bending neighbor if that neighbor occasionally ensures the village well doesn't freeze in January.
Okay, that makes sense. It's transactional.
Exactly. It is a transactional tolerance. The magical families offered subtle assistance, they traded superior goods, and mostly they kept to themselves.
As long as it was predictable.
Yes. As long as the pattern of behavior was predictable, the Muggles felt safe. They didn't need to know the deepest secrets of the craft. They only needed the comfort of the...
It's kind of like relying on a brilliant but really erratic piece of beta software.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Like when it works, you love it. It saves you hours of time. But the second it crashes and deletes all your work, you don't just think it's a glitch. You view it as malicious.
Yes, you feel betrayed by it.
Right. So it's this profound localized dependence. But dependence is a double-edged sword. The source points out the massive risk inherent in this setup. The same healer you trust to cure your child's pneumonia becomes the immediate target of your rage if that child dies.
And I would argue the rage is even more intense in that scenario. Because if a normal physician fails, you blame the disease.
Right, it was God's will or whatever.
Exactly. But if a magical healer fails, you blame the healer. You assume that because they have this extraordinary power, any failure to use it perfectly must be a deliberate act of malice.
Man, it makes me think of like living next to a controlled wildfire. In the dead of winter, that fire is keeping your house warm. You rely on it. You might even feel a little affection for it. But the fire isn't your friend. It's a force of nature. And the second the wind changes direction and that fire catches your roof, you don't rationalize. You don't say, well, the wind shifted. You hate the fire.
Right. You view it as a malicious entity that betrayed your trust. That is a very apt way to frame it.
Yeah.
The Muggles tolerated the wildfire of magic as long as it stayed in the hearth. But human nature dictates that when a deeply relied upon, poorly understood force suddenly turns destructive, the resulting backlash is catastrophic.
It's exponential.
Exactly. And in these early communities, the balance relied entirely on the magical individual maintaining absolute control over that fire at all times.
Yeah, which brings us to the most impossible variable in that equation. Because you can demand absolute control from a seasoned adult witch or wizard.
Yeah.
But you absolutely cannot demand it from a child. I mean, the biggest disruptor of this quiet coexistence wasn't dark wizards or malicious curses. It was toddlers.
The problem of the untrained, such a crucial point. We really have to strip away our modern understanding of magic.
Right, no boarding schools yet.
Yeah, actually. There was no centralized schooling. Hogwarts did not exist as a structured, mandatory institution for the masses during the early centuries.
So how did they learn?
Magical children learned through highly localized, uneven, and unpredictable trial and error, usually just taught by their parents in the margins.
And the source material is really explicit about how magic works in the young. It is inextricably linked to raw emotion. It's deeply physiological.
Very much so.
Like when a magical 5-year-old gets angry, they don't just scream. Their emotional spike channels directly into their latent magical core, and the physical environment reacts.
A glass shatters across the room. A heavy oak table violently flips over. A prized toy that was taken away suddenly levitates back into the child.
Just normal kid stuff, but with explosives attached.
Right. To a magical parent, these bursts of accidental magic are recognized developmental milestones. They are stressful, certainly, but they are natural.
But, okay, put yourself in the shoes of the muggle neighbor who happens to be sitting in the kitchen when that oak table just flips itself over.
It's terrifying.
The source breaks down the psychology of the observers, and I think it's critical. The neighbor doesn't have a textbook on magical developmental psychology. They don't have a framework for accidental magic.
No, of course not. When a human being witnesses an event that fundamentally shatters their understanding of the laws of physics, their brain scrambles for a framework to categorize it.
It has to make sense of the nonsense.
Exactly. And without the context of untrained magical youth, the Muggle observer categorizes the event using the only framework available in a superstitious medieval society.
Demons.
Demonic influence, possession, or malicious witchcraft. They assign intent to an act.
So the magic kid throws a tantrum, the wind howls, a window breaks, and the muggle neighbor doesn't think, oh, the kid missed nap time. They think this child is a vessel for unnatural, chaotic evil.
Yeah. Furthermore, the attempts by magical parents to mitigate often made the situation exponentially worse.
How so?
Well, sensing the growing unease and the side eyes from the village, parents would attempt to force their children to aggressively suppress their magic. They demanded the child hide their...
Oh, wow. And we know from the lore how dangerous suppression. You can't just tell magic to stop existing.
No, it's an active...
Right. It's like putting a lid on a boiling pot of water without turning down the... If a child is terrified of their own abilities and tries to pack that energy down into a psychological box, it doesn't just dissipate. It ferments. It builds pressure.
The physical manifestation of suppressed magic is devastating. Instead of small, manageable bursts of accidental magic, like a cracked cup here, a locked door opening there, the suppression creates a pressure.
And when it blows...
When the magic finally breaks out, it isn't a tantrum. It's an explosion. It can tear the roof off a house. It can inadvertently harm bystanders.
Which instantly validates the absolute worst fears of the non-magical community.
Precisely.
You have a few minor incidents, the neighbors start whispering, the parents panic and force the kid to press the magic. The kid eventually explodes and blows up a barn, and the neighbors say, aha, we were right all along. They are dangerous.
It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of terror.
It really does.
And it solidifies patterns in the minds of the non-magical community. Human brains are aggressive pattern recognition machines.
Oh, for sure.
If a muggle sees a child levitate a stone on a Tuesday, and then their prized milk cow dies of a common illness on Thursday, the brain connects those two entirely unrelated events.
So the accidental magic becomes this scapegoat for literally every natural tragedy in the village.
Every single one. Bad crops, illness, bad weather.
And for a long time, these were isolated tragedies. Like a family gets chased out of a village, they move 100 miles away, they start over.
The fear was localized.
Right. The rumor of the weird kid who broke the window stayed in that specific valley. But the deep dive source points to a historical pivot where that local, disjointed suspicion gets supercharged. The era of the village squabble ends, and the era of institutional eradication began.
This is a huge shift. What's fascinating here is how the centralization of religious and secular authority across Europe fundamentally altered the landscape of survival.
Because the institutions got involved.
Yes. We see the rise of powerful, structured institutions, monarchies, the church, sprawling bureaucratic fiefdom. These institutions consolidated their power by defining the world in absolute, rigid binary, good and natural and unnatural, divine and demonic.
And magic simply refuses to fit into a binary. It's too messy. It's a tool. It's a force of nature.
Exactly.
But if you are an emerging mega institution trying to control the hearts and minds of an entire continent, ambiguity is your absolute worst.
Ambiguity undermines authority. Think about it. If a local priest preaches that all ailments are the will of God, and then the witch at the edge of the woods cures the plague with a crushed root and a whispered incantation, the witch has just undermined the theological authority of the entire church.
Right, because she solved a problem God supposedly created.
Exactly. The institution cannot control the magic, nor can they explain it within their established doctrines. Therefore, the only logical institutional response is eradicate.
It's just wild, and this shift is so brilliantly detailed historical lore. The language itself was deliberately modified from the top down.
The vocabulary change.
Yeah. A generation prior, the local muggles might have referred to the wizard's abilities as a craft or a peculiar skill, but the organized authorities actively rebranded it.
It became heresy.
Yes. It became dark arts. They weaponized the vocabulary to ensure that the space for quiet tolerance was completely paved over by moral absolutes.
So the mechanism of fear changed from a localized whisper network to a continent-wide broadcast. A story about a supposed magical attack in an isolated hamlet didn't just stay in France. It was documented by clerics, carried by traveling inquisitors, and preached from pulpit in Germany.
They created a unified collective suspicion, the birth of the ideological echo chamber. The Muggles are being fed this constant institutionalized narrative that their magical neighbors are not just weird, but actively plotting their destruction.
And when you convince a population that they are facing an existential threat, the rules of basic human decency just evaporate.
Which ushers in the absolute darkest chapter of this shared history, the witch hunts.
The transition from passive suspicion to systemic, violent.
Yeah, the non-magical world mobilized. We saw the creation of specialized roles, witchfinders, inquisitors, entire localized militias dedicated to the removal, confinement, and execution of magical families.
It was a very...
Now, I want to pause here and address something that I think every single person who reads this lore struggles. I know I did.
The power disparity.
Yes. When we talk about the witch hunt, the immediate question is always about that disparity. The wizards have magic. They can bend reality, teleport, manipulate minds, shoot fire.
And the Muggles have pitchforks, torches, and rope.
Exactly. How on earth did a mob of non-magical peasants pose an actual existential threat to beings capable of that level of power? Like, why did the wizards just fight back and win?
You are touching on the exact myth that drove the brutality of the Muggles themselves, the myth of magical invulnerability.
Okay, explain that.
Well, Muggles assumed that a witch or wizard was an inexhaustible font of power, capable of absolute defense at all times.
Right. If I'm a wizard and a mob shows up at my door, why don't I just cast a massive shield charm, flick my wand, and apparate my family to the Alps?
Because that assumes magic is like a...
No.
Let's break down the actual physical mechanics of magic as detailed in the source. Magic is not a video game where you have a passive shield that stays up infinite. It is an active exertion.
So it takes a toll on the body.
Highly physiological. It requires intense mental focus, precise intention, emotional stability, and immense physical stamina.
I see.
Consider the athletic endurance required to run a marathon. An Olympic sprinter is objectively faster and more physically capable than an average person, right?
For sure.
However, if you wake that Olympic sprinter up at 3 a.m, deprive them of food for 2 days, tie their hands behind their back, and surround them with 20 screaming people wielding weapons.
Their athletic superiority is entirely neutralized compromised by the environment.
Wow. Exactly. Your athletic ability won't say you can't act.
That makes terrifying sense, because you might be capable of a complex shield charm, but if a mob breaks down your door in the middle of the night, dragging you out of bed, the sheer adrenaline, the panic, the physical blows, it just shatters the focus required to cast.
It does. The lore details accounts of witches and wizards who simply lost the ability to perform complex magic, sheer exhaustion.
Just too tired to do magic.
Exact. Apparition, for instance, requires deep deliberation. You cannot safely apparate if your mind is fractured by panic. The risk of splinching, literally leaving half your body behind, is just too high.
God, that's great.
Under physical restraint, deprived of their wands, and subjected to the chaotic terror of a mob, a magical person is overwhelmingly vulnerable.
And the really tragic part of this dynamic is how the Muggles interpreted the situation.
Yeah.
Because the Muggles genuinely believed the wizards were invulnerable demigods, they justified the most extreme, excessive force imaginable.
Yes, they thought it was necessary.
They didn't just arrest people, they used overwhelming numbers, brutal surprise tactic, and immediate subjugation.
And let's examine the scenario where a witch or wizard did manage to fight back. Suppose a wizard pushed through the exhaustion, summoned a burst of magical energy, blasted the mob backward, and escaped into the night.
To the wizard, that's self-defense. They survived.
Right. But to the Muggles, it is absolute, undeniable proof of the existential threat. The wizard's escape validates the mob's terror.
Oh, I see.
The Muggles point to the blasted crater in the village square and say, "Look at what they are capable of. Next time, we must strike harder. We must strike faster. We must bring 100 men instead of 20.
It's an impossible, escalating feedback loop. Every act of magical self-defense directly subsidizes the expansion of the persecution. You survive tonight, but you essentially ensure that tomorrow's mob will be twice as large and 10 times as violent.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this realization triggered a profound psychological break within the magical. For centuries, they had operated as individuals or small family units, but the witch hunts proved that individual strength, no matter how potent, was statistically incapable of surviving coordinated, systemic persecution.
They realized the math is just against them. There are thousands of Muggles for every one wizard. You cannot duel a con.
Therefore, the entire paradigm of survival had to change. They had to transition from individual physical defense to collective strategic evasion. Fighting was a losing game. The only viable path forward was to ensure the fight never happened.
Let's transition the visual here. If our backdrop a minute ago was a burning village square, I want to pull the camera back and plunge the landscape into dark. We're looking at a map of Europe, but instead of cities, we see hundreds of tiny, glowing, isolated dots moving erratically through the shadow. Because surviving the mob in your front yard didn't actually save you if the mob could just track you to the next town.
The nature of the danger fundamentally, the immediate threat wasn't just physical violence anymore. The ultimate threat was recognition. Being known became the equivalent of death.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this, because the weaponization of memory is one of the most chilling aspects of the source material.
It really.
We talked today about the permanence of a digital foot. If you listening try to go off the grid right now, it is nearly impossible.
Right. Cameras everywhere.
Your credit cards, facial recognition, your social media, you leave a data trail that follows you everywhere. Well, for the magical community in the 15th and 16th centuries, their digital footprint was local gossip. It was human memory and rumor.
And rumor, in an era of heightened paranoia, is far more lethal than fact. You couldn't simply pack your cart and move 3 villages, because the informal information networks, the peddlers, the traveling clergy, the merchants, they carried descriptions, they carried the patterns. If a family relocated and a single Muggle in the new village thought they recognized the man from a wanted poster, or noticed a child accidentally levitate a cup, the entire cycle of violence restarted instantly.
You are fighting a narrative that is entirely out of your control. If you try to deny the rumors, you draw attention to yourself. If you stay completely silent, the community views you as aloof and suspicious, and the rumors just fester.
Exactly.
The goal of a magical family shifted entirely. It wasn't about building a life anymore. It was about achieving total, absolute anonymity.
This forced a radical redefinition of the concept of, for centuries, magical families had ancestral lands, established apothecaries, multi-generational root-specific communities.
And that was all gone.
The persecution severed all of that. Home was no longer a permanent physical coordinate on a map. Home became a transient state of survival.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The era of the safe house. The source goes into incredible detail about how these networks were established. We see the invention and mass deployment of concealment charms, Muggle-repelling wards, and complex physical disguises.
It was a whole new industry of hiding.
Yeah. A family would identify a dilapidated, abandoned barn in the middle of a moor. They would ward it, live in it, and the absolute second they felt the gaze of a muggle linger too long, they just abandoned it and moved in the dead of
It was an existence defined by perpetual motion and hypervigilance. The psychological toll on the community, particularly the young, was absolutely devastating.
And this directly impacted the institutional structures of the magical world, most notably Hogwarts.
A huge shift for Hogwarts.
Right. We think of Hogwarts today as this wondrous boarding school, a place of discovery, sorting hats, grand feasts. But the source material paints a very different picture of the castle during this specific era.
The function of the castle evolved dramatically to meet the existential crisis of the era. Its geographic location in the Scottish Highlands was originally selected simply to provide a quiet environment for study, far from the distractions of population.
Makes sense for a school.
But during the hunts, that isolation became its primary strategic military asset.
It militarized. It wasn't just a school anymore. It was a fortress. It was a refuge for children whose parents were either on the run or had already been captured.
Consider the psychological state of the student body arriving at the castle. These were not children wide-eyed with the wonder of magic. These were children deeply traumatized by the violence of the Muggle.
They'd seen awful things.
They arrived carrying the heavy burden of survival. The faculty had to transition from being mere educators to acting as guardians and protectors.
The curriculum itself underwent a massive overhaul, too. You aren't teaching a traumatized 11-year-old how to turn a teacup into a gerbil for the fun of it.
No, absolutely not.
The magical theory shifted heavily toward defensive magic, concealment, and the absolute necessity of emotional regulation.
Control became the paramount lesson. The professors had to drill into these students that an emotional outburst resulting in accidental magic wasn't just a disciplinary, it was an existential threat.
Wow.
They were taught that to reveal themselves was to invite destruction upon their entire The enchantments surrounding the castle grounds were conformed, not to keep the harsh weather out, but to actively confound and repel any non-magical approach.
Hogwarts essentially became the testing ground, right? The blueprint for what the entire global magical community realized they had to do. Because you can't run from safe house to safe house forever.
No, you can't.
Living in these fractured, terrified cells, constantly looking over your shoulder, it's unsustainable. It destroys culture. It destroys community. The magical leadership recognized that partial concealment, hiding in a warded barn, casting a quick illusion to avoid a patrol, was a failing strategy.
The sheer volume of the Muggle population, combined with their accelerating technological and societal organization, meant the margin for error was shrinking to zero.
They were running out of time.
A permanent, structural, and global...
Which leads to the single most consequential piece of legislation in the history of this world, the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692.
The statute was not merely a law. It was a coordinated global retreat. It was a formal declaration that the magical world and the non-magical world were fundamentally incompatible, and that the only way to guarantee the survival of magic was to remove it entirely from public awareness.
Let's really dig into the logistics here, because this is where the sheer scale of the operation just melts my brain.
It's astounding.
To enact the statute of secrecy, you can't just have a bunch of wizard politicians sign a piece of parchment and say, okay, everybody hide. They had to structurally rewire the entire planet. Let's switch the visual again. Imagine a massive, complex, turning astrolabe or a giant, intricate clockwork mech, just pure coordinated bureaucracy.
The logistical requirements were staggering. First, they had to address physics.
Right.
The magical community possessed massive infrastructure, dragon reserves in Romania, sprawling wizarding villages, commercial districts hidden within major Muggle cities.
Seriously, how do you hide a dragon reserve? You can't just put a tarp over it.
You utilize spatial manipulation, the widespread application of unplottability. This isn't just turning something invisible, it is the active warping of geography.
Bending space.
Literally. The magic folds the physical space in such a way that a Muggle cart path can literally curve around a massive magical settlement without the traveler ever perceiving the shift in their trajectory. They manipulated the physical dimensions of reality to carve out hidden pockets where the magical community could reside permanently.
And to manage all of this, they had to invent a colossal bureaucracy. This source details the formation of the modern ministries of magic. And the irony here is so thick, it's suffocating.
It really is.
To escape the oppressive, highly structured authority of the Muggle witch hunters, the magical world had to turn around and build a highly rigid, restrictive, and authoritarian government of its own.
They traded external persecution for intense internal policing. The statute required the magical government to aggressively monitor their own citizens.
Because one mistake ruins everything.
Exactly. If a wizard in London slipped up and cast a charm in front of a muggle baker, the ministry had to know instantly. They developed tracking magic to detect unauthorized spells. They created the improper use of magic office.
And the Obliviators.
Yes. They institutionalized the Obliviators, a specialized task force whose sole job was to deploy to the scene of a breach and violently alter the memories of any muggle witness.
They created a society where absolute compliance wasn't just a civic duty. It was the baseline requirement for the species not going extinct. And if you broke the rule, the punishment was severe because a single mistake could bring the whole house of cards down.
But securing the physical space and policing current behavior only solved half the problem. As we noted at the very beginning of this discussion, the two worlds had coexisted for millennia.
Right. You can hide the dragon reserve today. You can wipe the memory of the baker who saw a wand today. But how do you hide thousands of years of recorded, shared history?
The past is stubborn.
Very. The Muggles had libraries. They had artwork, songs, parish records, and generational lore detailing their interactions with magic.
This is where we reach the most invasive aspect of the separation, the rewriting of reality.
The global gaslighting.
The magical world engaged in a systematic, global campaign to alter Muggle historical records and human memory. They didn't just retreat, they actively gaslit the non-magical world into believing that magic was, and always had been, nothing more than a childish myth.
I try to imagine the war room where they plan this. It's like a team of showrunners trying to execute a massive retcon on a television show that's been running for 2,000 seasons.
That's a good way to put it.
But instead of editing a script, you are editing the lived experiences and factual records of millions of real people. It's insane.
The precision required for this operation is terrifying to consider. A crude memory charm leaves a blank space in the mind. If you simply erase a Muggle's memory of a magical event, say a dragon burning down a medieval village, you leave a cognitive void.
And human curiosity hates a void. If an entire village wakes up and their houses are burned to ash and none of them remember why, they're going to investigate. They're going to obsess over the gap.
Exactly the issue. Therefore, the Obliviators and historical revisionists couldn't just erase. They had to replace.
They had to write a new story.
They had to actively write mundane, highly plausible explanations into the minds of the survivors and the official record. The dragon attack became a tragic fire started by a lightning strike in a dry summer.
Wow.
A localized plague cured by a wizard became a miraculous natural remission credited to a sudden change in the weather.
They systematically scrubbed the magic out of the narrative and replaced it with coincidence, weather events, and mass hysteria. And the result is the creation of a literal dual existence.
Yes.
The source material really emphasizes the spatial weirdness. You could have two people, a Muggle and a wizard, standing on the exact same physical coordinates in the middle of London.
And they are experiencing two entirely different, mutually exclusive realities.
That's so wild to think about.
The Muggle looks at a ruined, condemned department store with a sign warning of structural danger. The wizard looks at St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injury, bustling with healers and patients.
The psychological weight of maintaining that illusion on the magical community is profound. Put yourself in the shoes of a wizard living in the immediate aftermath of the statue.
It would be incredibly difficult.
You know the true, vibrant, complex history of your town. You know the incredible things that happen, but you are legally forbidden, under threat of imprisonment, from ever acknowledging it to the vast majority of the population.
I want you to imagine that isolation. Imagine knowing the true history of your town, but being legally forbidden from ever sharing. You must stand by in silence and watch the rest of the world operate on a fabricated, flattened version of reality.
Mad.
You must listen to Muggle scholars confidently explain the natural origins of events you know were magic. The isolation required to maintain the lie forces a deep structural alienation of magical psyche.
It is an incredibly lonely existence. But that profound isolation wasn't distributed equally across the magical population.
Yeah.
The burden of this dual reality fell with crushing, agonizing weight on one specific group.
The Muggleborns.
Yes.
The Muggleborn dilemma is perhaps the most tragic sociological consequence of the Statute of Secrecy. For a witch or a wizard born to an established magical family, the secrecy was a barrier between them and strangers.
Right, they were hiding from outside.
But for a child born to non-magical parents, the secrecy was a barrier driven straight through the center of their own.
Talk about the ultimate, most painful form of code switching imaginable. A Muggle-born child spends their first 11 years fully embedded in the Muggle world. Their parents, their siblings, their friends, their entire foundational understanding of how the universe works is non-magical.
Everything they know.
Then their letter arrived. They are pulled into this spectacular, hidden reality.
They attend Hogwarts, they learn to bend the laws of nature, they immerse themselves in a culture with its own sports, its own economy, its own history. And then, at the end of the term, they board the train and return to the Muggle world for the summer holidays.
And they have to sit at the dinner table and lie. They have to look at the people who love them the most in the world and actively deceive them.
It's heartbreaking.
The source material hints at the sheer emotional exhaustion of this. A Muggle-born student learns how to cure a disease with a potion, but they have to sit and watch their Muggle grandmothers suffer from a mundane illness because the law strictly forbids them from using magic to help her.
They are forced to live a fractured existence. They become the only remaining bridges between two worlds that have violently severed all ties, but they are forbidden from acting as a bridge.
They're stuck in the middle.
The magical world demanded absolute discretion, prioritizing the survival of the statute over the psychological well-being of the individual.
Which fundamentally changed the nature of magical education for these kids. You weren't going to school just to learn wondrous things. You were being trained to manage a liability.
Magic became a danger.
Magic, for a Muggle-born, is presented almost as a dangerous secret they must constantly police. If they slip up, if they drop a wand in front of their Muggle cousin, they don't just get grounded. They risk exposing an entire hidden society.
This raises an important question. How long can a society teach fear, mandate restriction, and enforce absolute separation before the mechanism of survival fundamentally mutates?
The answer the lore provides is pretty clear. You can't. You cannot maintain a posture of defensive, paranoid isolation for centuries without it warping your cultural soul.
No, it always breaks down.
Which brings us into the profound, devastating echoes of isolation and how a mechanism designed for safety slowly bred a culture of extremism.
Because when you isolate a society for multiple generations, a dangerous psychological occurs. The original practical reasons for the isolation, the witch hunts, the burnings, the desperate need to survive, they fade from living memory.
They become abstract history.
Exactly. They become stories.
Right. If you are a wizard born in, let's say, 1950, you have never seen a witch hunt. You have no visceral concept of the mob. To you, the separation isn't a desperate tactic deployed by a terrified populace. It is simply the natural order of the universe. It is the way things have always been.
And because the magical community has zero meaningful, authentic interaction with the Muggle world, their entire understanding of non-magical people is built on assumption, outdated stereotypes, and a vacuum of empathy.
The echo chamber effect.
This is the pathology of the echo chamber at its most apt. When a society isolates itself, practical safety measures often mutate into dogmatic elitism.
When a society only talks to itself, its protective measures curdle. The historical narrative of the statute was twisted by elements within the magical community. Instead of teaching, we hide because the Muggles outnumber us and fear what they don't understand, a new, far more insidious narrative took root.
The narrative of supremacy, the ideology of blood purity.
That's a dark turn.
The distance and the secrecy were reinterpreted not as a practical necessity, but as empirical evidence of inherent magical superiority. The logic became, we are separated from them, not because we are hiding, but because we are above them.
We're too special.
They are mundane, we are extraordinary. Therefore, to mix with them, to associate with them, is a degradation of our inherent special.
So what does this all mean? It's chilling how smoothly a wall built for defense becomes a pedestal for supremacy. The ultimate crushing tragedy of the International Statute of Secrecy is that purely on its own logistical terms, it was a resounding success.
It worked perfectly.
It worked. It saved their society from eradication. But the cure was a poison that institutionalized segregation and birthed a domestic terrorism movement based on genetic purity.
And the societal cost was a profound loss of shared human progress. By severing the timeline, both worlds were forced to advance entirely.
They split the tech tree.
Essentially, yeah. The non-magical world, bereft of magical shortcuts, was forced to innovate through science, engineering, and technology to manipulate their environment. The magical world refined charms and potions, but remained remarkably stagnant in social and technological.
They lost the combined synthesis. Imagine the medical advancements if Muggle scientific method and cellular biology were combined with magical restorative properties.
The possibilities are endless.
The statute preserved the existence of the magical world, but it severely stunted the collective potential of humanity as a whole.
It is a cautionary tale about the long-term cost of closed borders, and when we remove the friction of interaction with those who are different from us, we achieve stagnation.
And eventually, that stagnation breeds contempt.
Always.
Let's bring this all the way back to the list. What does this massive sociological autopsy mean for us sitting here in the real world today? Because this deep dive isn't just a fascinating exploration of fantasy lore, it acts as a massive blinking warning light about the mechanics of modern society.
The underlying behaviors are entirely human. We see the exact same patterns in how how we construct our modern digital and ideological bubbles.
Look at how easily our protective boundaries, whether they are geographic borders, gated communities, or algorithmic echo chambers on social media, look how easily they curdle into arrogance. When we stop interacting with people who don't share our specific reality, we start to rely on assumptions. We build a wall to feel safe, but within a generation, we convince ourselves that the people on the other side of the wall are fundamentally less human than we are.
I want to remind everyone that history is rarely shaped by single, grandiose decisions made by obvious villain dark room. The architecture of separation is built through the accumulation of thousands of small, fearful choices. A family moving a mile further away. A parent telling a child to hide their authentic. A community deciding it is easier to enforce a comfortable lie than to engage with a
Those small daily acts of withdrawal build the invisible walls that eventually become impossible to tear down.
They do.
Okay, as we wrap up this epic, exhausting journey from the fragile transactional coexistence of the village healer through the terror of the mob, the logistical nightmare of the Statute of Secrecy, the massive gaslighting of global history, all the way to the tragic rise of blood purity, I want to leave you with one final, slightly mind-bending thought to mull over.
A shift in perspective out.
We established that, according to this lore, the magical and non-magical worlds fully separated centuries. The non-magical world was left behind, their memories violently wiped, completely oblivious to the wondrous reality-bending forces that exist right next door.
Completely in the dark.
But human beings possess a deep genetic resilience. If the non-magical world had to invent science and technology to place the magic they lost, how much of our modern technological landscape is actually driven by a subconscious grief?
Wait, you were suggesting that technology is an attempt to recreate a lost reality.
Exactly. Think about it. We build airplanes to replicate the lost magic of unassisted flight. We invent instantaneous video calls across the globe because we deeply miss the ability to communicate through a fireplace or a Patronus.
Oh, wow.
Our miraculous medicines, our smartphones that summon knowledge with a tap of glass, are they all just driven by an ancient subconscious human grief for a magic we were violently forced to forget? Are we just frantically building machines to replicate the magic that was stolen from our collective memory?
That reframes the entirety of human innovation. It views progress not merely as a march toward the future, but as a desperate attempt to heal a phantom limb we don't even consciously realize was amplified.
Think about that the next time you hold your glowing screen in the dark. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take a hard look at the invisible borders in your own life, rigorously question the accepted histories you've been handed, and never underestimate the immense, fragile power of a shared reality. Until next time.